I knew I was dead when they fired me for missing a meeting the CEO explicitly told me to skip. I thought I was collateral damage in a $125 million game. Turns out I was protected by a clause my boss never read, but his wife knew by heart. If you have ever taken the fall for an empty chair, stick around. You will want to check your employment contract and your boss's marriage license. My name is Piper Phillips, and until exactly 9:17 this morning, I was the head of systems strategy at Luminorth Systems here in Austin. If you have ever worked in tech, specifically the Austin flavor of tech, you know the type. It is a world of exposed brick walls, endless supplies of cold brew on tap, and a pervasive, suffocating bro culture that masks its toxicity behind mindfulness seminars and mandatory fun hours. I have spent the last 6 years of my life building the digital backbone of this company, surviving 3 rounds of layoffs, 2 pivot strategies, and 1 ill-advised rebranding that cost us $2 million just to change a shade of blue in the logo. I thought I had seen every play in the corporate playbook. I was wrong. I had never seen a public execution performed with a PowerPoint slide. It was the Monday morning all-hands strategy sync, a ritual I usually dreaded but tolerated because it was the only time the entire executive team was in one room. The conference room was known as the Summit, a glass-walled fishbowl overlooking the Colorado River, designed to make everyone inside feel like a master of the universe. The air conditioning was always set to a freezing 65 degrees, presumably to keep us alert, or maybe just to justify the branded fleece vests everyone wore. I sat near the middle of the mahogany table, my notebook open, ready to jot down the usual buzzwords about synergy and paradigm shifts. Logan Pierce, our CEO, stood at the head of the table. Logan is a man who treats every internal meeting like he is giving a TED Talk. He paced back and forth, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, his hands gesturing expansively as if he were parting the Red Sea rather than discussing quarterly revenue targets. He had that practiced, somber expression on his face, the one he uses when he wants to simulate empathy. He calls it his leadership face. I call it his acting face. He stopped pacing and looked around the room, making eye contact with the 2 new board members who had flown in from San Francisco. Then his eyes slid over me, cold and glassy, before snapping back to the screen behind him. "Today, we need to talk about standards," Logan said, his voice dropping an octave to sound grave. "We need to talk about what it means to be fully committed to the vision of Luminorth. We preach accountability, we preach excellence, but words are wind if they are not backed by presence." He clicked a button on his remote. The slide changed. The room went deadly silent. It was not a graph. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a high-resolution photograph of our conference room, taken from a low angle. In the center of the frame, in sharp focus, was a single, empty Herman Miller Aeron chair. My chair. I felt a prickle of heat climb up the back of my neck. I recognized the angle. That photo had been taken last Friday morning, during the client kickoff meeting with the delegation from Tokyo. Logan pointed at the screen. "This is what failure looks like," he declared. "This is a void where leadership should be." Last Friday, we had the most critical meeting of this fiscal year. A $40 million contract with the Tanaka Group was on the table, a partnership that would secure our IPO roadmap. And do you know who was not there to answer their technical questions regarding data sovereignty? Our head of system strategy. He turned to look at me then. The entire room turned with him. I felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes pressing against my skin. The VP of sales, a guy named Chad who still high-fived people in the hallway, let out a small, derisive snort. "Piper," Logan said, his voice dripping with disappointed father energy. "Your absence during the Tanaka Critical Path Review was not just a scheduling conflict. It was a statement. It told our potential partners that their security concerns were not a priority. It told this board that you do not value the future of this company. Because of your negligence, the deal is now on shaky ground. We are scrambling to save face." My coffee, which had been warm and comforting moments ago, suddenly churned in my stomach like battery acid. I stared at him, my pen hovering over my notebook. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its sheer, unadulterated malice. "Logan," I started, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You explicitly told me." He cut me off with a sharp raised hand. He did not let me finish. He did not want a debate. He wanted a spectacle. "We cannot afford weak links." "Piper," he boomed, talking over me, "the board agrees. Effective immediately. Your employment with Luminorth is terminated for cause. Gross negligence and failure to perform critical duties." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. I looked around the table. No one met my gaze. The CTO, a man I had covered for when he relapsed on painkillers last year, was staring intently at his cuticles. The CFO was busy adjusting his watch. They knew. They all knew. This was theater. I looked toward the corner of the room, near the door. Brittany from HR was sitting there on a folding chair, looking like she wanted to merge with the drywall. In her lap, she clutched a thick manila envelope. I could see the edge of the paper inside. It was already printed. It was already clipped. That was the tell. You do not draft, review, and print a 20-page termination agreement in the 5 minutes since the meeting started. That document had been sitting on her desk since Friday, maybe even Thursday. This was not a reaction to a missed meeting. This was a premeditated assassination. I looked back at Logan. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at the new board members, gauging their reaction, making sure they bought his performance of the strong, decisive leader cutting out the rot. He looked triumphant. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. I was the one who wrote the crisis response protocol for this company. I was the one who designed the redundant server architecture that kept us online during the Great Texas Freeze when everyone else went dark. I was the person they called at 3 a.m. when the database fragmented. And now, I was being fired for gross negligence by a man who could not tell the difference between a server rack and a toaster oven. I stood up. I did not slam my notebook. I did not throw my water glass. I did not scream that he was a liar. I simply capped my pen. I picked up my phone. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I will expect my final paycheck to include all accrued vacation time. I said. My voice did not shake. It was the voice I used when I was troubleshooting a critical failure. Cold, detached, analytical. Logan smirked. It was a tiny twitch of his lip, invisible to everyone else. But I saw it. "Brittany will escort you out," he said dismissively. I walked toward the door. As I passed Brittany, she stood up, thrusting the envelope into my hands as if it were radioactive. Her eyes were wide and watery. She whispered a sorry that was so quiet, I had to read her lips. I took the envelope. I did not look back at the room. I did not look back at the slide with the empty chair. I walked out into the open plan office, past the rows of developers with their noise-canceling headphones, past the ping-pong table nobody used, and toward the elevators. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. They thought I was gone. They thought I was just another casualty of corporate restructuring. A middle-aged woman pushed out to make room for cheaper, younger, more compliant talent. They thought they had won. But here's the thing about system strategy. You never build a system without a backup. You never deploy code without a rollback plan. And you certainly never, ever go into a high-stakes environment without insurance. Logan thought I was just an employee he could delete like a bad line of code. He forgot that I was the one who built the operating system he was running on. Listen to me closely. If you have ever been the one doing the work while someone else took the credit, if you have ever been thrown under the bus so your boss could keep his bonus, or if you have ever been judged by an empty chair instead of a decade of results, do not go anywhere. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what I am about to tell you is not just a story about getting fired. It is a story about how a single piece of paper, a jealous wife, and a secret buried in a safe deposit box turned that empty chair into the most expensive piece of furniture Logan Pierce ever bought. You might want to grab a drink. This is going to get good. To understand how I ended up being fired in a glass-walled room in front of 20 people, you have to go back 72 hours. The ambush did not start with the slide deck on Monday morning. It started on Friday, with a red light on a security reader and a calendar invite that vanished into thin air. It was 8:40 in the morning. I arrived at the office early, carrying a tray of coffees for the Tanaka team. I had spent the previous 3 nights refining the architecture proposal, triple-checking the latency figures for the Trans-Pacific Data Bridge. I was ready. I was over-prepared. I tapped my badge against the reader for the executive elevator bank, expecting the usual cheerful chirp and the green light. Instead, the reader buzzed. A harsh, low-pitched rejection tone. The light flashed red. Access denied. I frowned and tapped it again. Red. Denied. I looked at the security guard, a guy named Marcus who had known me for 6 years. He looked down at his console, typing something. His brow furrowed. "That is weird. Piper," he said, avoiding my eyes. "System shows your clearance for the 35th floor has been suspended. Probably a glitch with the update they pushed last night." A glitch. In my line of work, there is no such thing as a convenient glitch. Glitches are symptoms, but I did not have time to debug the building security protocol. I had a $40 million meeting in 20 minutes. I smiled tightly at Marcus, told him I would take the service elevator, and badged into the main lobby instead. It worked there, just not for the floor where the meeting was happening. I got to my desk on the 24th floor, dumped the coffees, and woke up my laptop. I opened my calendar to pull up the agenda for the Tanaka kickoff. I watched the screen as Outlook synced. There was the blue block for the meeting, sitting firmly at 9 o'clock, and then, right before my eyes, it blinked. It did not fade. It simply ceased to exist. The blue block vanished, replaced by empty white space. My stomach dropped. I refreshed the page. Nothing. I checked my deleted items. Nothing. It was as if the meeting had never been scheduled. I grabbed my phone to call Logan's executive assistant, Chloe. Before I could dial, a notification popped up on Slack. It was from Chloe. "Piper, huge emergency. Logan just got an alert that the Dallas data center is experiencing a catastrophic cascading failure. Mainframes are unresponsive. He says you need to handle this personally right now, or we lose the southern grid. Do not worry about the Tanaka meeting. I will tell them you are saving the company. I will cover for you here." I stared at the message. Dallas was our primary redundancy hub. If Dallas went down, half our client base in Texas would go dark. It was the kind of fire drill that required all hands on deck, but the timing was impeccable. Too impeccable. I typed back fast. "I'm not seeing any alerts on my phone." Chloe replied instantly. "Dashboard is lagging. Logan is screaming. Go, now." I had a choice. Ignore a direct order from the CEO regarding a catastrophic failure to attend a meeting that had just vanished from my calendar, or do the job I was hired to do. It was not really a choice. I grabbed my laptop and sprinted toward the war room on the 24th floor. The war room is a windowless bunker lined with monitors. I burst in, startling 2 junior sysadmins who were eating breakfast burritos. I threw my laptop onto the main console and started typing. "Show me Dallas," I ordered. One of the juniors blinked. Dallas is green. Everything is nominal." I pulled up the master dashboard. Green lights across the board. Server load at 12%. Temperature stable. Latency minimal. There was no fire. There was not even smoke. I narrowed my eyes. "Pull the raw event logs," I said. "Look for manual overrides." It took me 4 minutes to find it. At 8:35 in the morning, someone had manually changed the alert threshold for the Dallas cluster to 0. It forced the system to trigger a critical downtime notification to the executive level, even though the servers were humming along perfectly. "Who authorized this change?" I asked. The junior admin checked the user ID. It says, "Admin01. That is the root account. Only you and the CTO have access to that." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the server room air conditioning. I had not logged in since last night. The CTO was currently on a sabbatical in Joshua Tree. That meant someone else had used the root credentials. Someone who wanted me out of that conference room upstairs. I fixed the threshold, cleared the false alarm, and slammed my laptop shut. I had been in the war room for 15 minutes. The meeting started 5 minutes ago. If I ran, I could still make the introductions. I bolted out of the war room and headed for the elevators. I was moving so fast I nearly collided with a woman standing in the hallway near the executive lift. I skidded to a halt, breathless. "I am so sorry," I said, reaching out to steady her. She turned. It was Vivian Pierce. I had only seen Logan's wife a handful of times at company holiday parties. She was usually standing silently by his side, holding a glass of champagne, looking like an expensive decoration. Up close, on a Tuesday morning, she looked different. She was wearing a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my rent. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. She was clutching a black leather folder against her chest. I glanced at the folder. Gold-embossed letters caught the light. Hartwell Family Trust. Vivian blinked, composing herself. She looked out of place, almost lost. Which made no sense. She had designed the interior of this office. "Piper, right?" she said. Her voice was lower than I remembered, devoid of the socialite chirp she used at parties. "Yes, Mrs. Pierce," I said, glancing anxiously at the elevator numbers. The car was stuck on the top floor. Vivian followed my gaze. "Logan is in a meeting," she said. I was looking for the private board elevator. I seem to have lost my badge. The private board elevator was around the corner, hidden behind a decorative partition. It did not require a badge if you had the code. "It is just round that pillar to the left," I said, pointing. "But you need a key code." She looked at me. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, scanning my face, not the eyes of a decoration. She shifted the folder in her arms, and for a second, I saw her grip tighten on it. "You are the one they call when things explode, aren't you?" she asked. It was an odd question. Not, "You work in IT," or "You are the strategy head." "Usually," I said, checking my watch. 18 minutes past 9. "I am sorry. I really have to get upstairs. There is a crisis. Or at least, I thought there was." Vivian nodded slowly. "Yes, I imagine there is." She stepped back, letting me pass. As I hit the call button again, she did not move toward the private elevator immediately. She just stood there, watching me. There was something in her expression I could not read. Pity calculation warning. I finally got a car. I rode it up to the 35th floor, tapping my foot impatiently. When the doors opened, the lobby was quiet. Too quiet. I walked briskly to the main conference room. The glass walls were frosted for privacy, so I could not see inside. I reached for the handle, bracing myself to apologize and explain the false alarm. The door opened before I touched it. The Tanaka delegation was walking out. They were bowing, but their faces were tight, unsmiling. The lead negotiator looked like he had just smelled something rotten. Logan was walking them out, his hand on the back of the lead delegate, guiding him aggressively. Logan looked up and saw me standing there, breathless, holding my laptop. "Ah, Piper," he said loudly. His voice carried across the lobby. "So glad you could finally join us." The Tanaka representative glanced at me, then looked away dismissively. "We have discussed your concerns regarding the infrastructure instability." "Mr. Pierce," the translator said, "we will have to review our position." Logan sighed. A sound of long-suffering patience. "I understand entirely. It is hard to build trust when the team is not aligned." He looked at me. He did not look angry. He looked satisfied. It was the look of a man who had just successfully moved a pawn exactly where he wanted it. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to say that the Dallas alert was a setup. I wanted to say that my calendar had been wiped. I wanted to say that his assistant told me to go home. "Piper," Logan said, his voice dropping so only I could hear. "We will debrief this disaster later. You have done enough damage for one morning." He turned his back on me and walked the clients toward the elevators. I stood there, frozen. I looked down at my phone. The Slack message from Chloe. The one telling me to go to the war room was gone, deleted. I went back to my desk. I sat there for 8 hours. I did not work. I just watched the network traffic, looking for the footprint of whoever had modified the Dallas logs. But the logs were being scrubbed. As I watched, the entry for admin 01 disappeared. overwritten by a scheduled maintenance script that had been manually triggered to run 6 hours early. They were erasing the evidence in real time. I drove home in silence. The Texas sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I pulled into my driveway, walked into my kitchen, and poured a glass of wine. I did not drink it. I just held the cold glass against my forehead. At 7:45 in the evening, my phone buzzed. Outlook. I opened the email. It was from Brittany in HR. The subject line was bold and black. Formal notice. Failure to perform critical duties regarding Tanaka account. I opened the attachment. It was a formal write-up. It detailed my unauthorized absence from the most critical meeting of the quarter. It cited a lack of communication. It claimed that I had been unreachable for 45 minutes. It stated that my actions had caused material reputational harm to Luma North Systems. There was no mention of the Dallas alert, no mention of the badge failure, no mention of the calendar glitch. It was a perfect frame job, clean, documented, irrefutable to anyone who did not know where to look. I put the phone down on the counter. I looked at the glass of wine. Then I looked at the calendar on my wall. It was the 13th of the month. I walked to the hallway closet, pushed aside the winter coats I never wore in Texas, and knelt down. I pulled up the loose floorboard in the corner and dragged out the heavy, fireproof safe I had bolted to the subfloor. I spun the dial, left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. The safe clicked open. Inside, sitting on top of my passport and emergency cash, was a black folder. It looked almost identical to the one Vivian Pierce had been holding in the hallway. I pulled it out. The label on the spine was yellowed with age. Key Person Contingencies, LNS. I ran my finger over the label. Logan thought he had won the day. He thought he had erased me, but he had forgotten the one rule of systems architecture that I had preached since day one. Data is never truly deleted. It is just moved to a different sector, and sometimes that sector is a black folder in a floor safe that you have not opened in 3 years. I opened the folder. The first page was a signed agreement, and right there, at the bottom, was a signature that was going to cost Logan Pierce everything he thought he owned. The walk from the boardroom to the Human Resources office was less than 50 feet, but it felt like a march to the gallows. Brittany walked half a step behind me, a physical reminder that I was no longer a trusted executive but a security risk. She did not say a word. The click of her sensible heels on the polished concrete floor was the only sound in the hallway, echoing like a countdown. We entered the small breakout room usually reserved for nursing mothers or private phone calls. Today, it was the kill room. The setup was so cliché it was almost insulting. On the round laminate table sat the standard termination trinity, a box of cheap facial tissues, a bottle of lukewarm water, and a thick white envelope. They really do have a playbook for this. The tissues say we expect you to be emotional and weak. The water says we are not monsters. Stay hydrated while we ruin your life. The envelope says, go away quietly. I sat down. I did not touch the water. I did not look at the tissues. I folded my hands on the table and looked at Brittany. She was 24, maybe 25. She had been at the company for 8 months. I remembered approving the budget for her hiring. Now she was sitting across from me, avoiding my eyes, shuffling papers with trembling hands. Piper, Brittany began, her voice pitching up slightly at the end of my name. She was reading from a script. I could see her eyes tracking the text on the paper in front of her. This is a difficult decision, and one we do not take lightly. Please understand that this action is not a reflection of your intrinsic value as a person, but rather a necessary business alignment regarding performance standards. I said nothing. I just watched her. She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside, you will find the formal notice of termination, effective immediately. As Logan stated, the cause is listed as gross negligence resulting in material risk to company assets and client relationships. I reached out and opened the folder. The paper was heavy, expensive stock. Luma North spared no expense, even when firing people. I scanned the text. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. Termination for cause gross negligence. Incident report. Employee failed to attend mandatory strategic partnership meeting with Tanaka Group, resulting in loss of confidence. That part I expected. What I did not expect was the paragraph underneath it. History of performance issues. Employee has received multiple verbal warnings from CEO Logan Pierce regarding a lack of physical presence during critical operational windows over the past 6 months. I stopped reading. My blood ran cold, then hot. I looked up at Brittany. Multiple verbal warnings, I asked. My voice was calm, which seemed to unsettle her more than shouting would have. Brittany looked at her script, then back at me. She swallowed. The file indicates that Logan has had several conversations with you about visibility and commitment. That is a lie, I said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Logan has never once spoken to me about visibility. In fact, 3 weeks ago, he sent me a bottle of Dom Perignon for managing the cloud migration over the weekend while he was golfing in Napa. Is that noted in your file, Brittany? She did not answer. She just tapped a manicured finger on the next document in the stack. We are prepared to offer a separation package, she said, rushing to get back to the safety of the script. Because of your tenure, the company is willing to offer 3 months of base salary as a severance payment. 3 months. I had built the infrastructure that processed 80% of their revenue. I had slept on a beanbag chair in the server room for 4 days straight during the Series B fundraising crunch. I had personally trained every engineer who was now sitting outside that door, and they were offering me 90 days of pay to disappear. There is a condition. Of course, Brittany added, sliding a thicker document across the table. To receive the severance, we need you to sign this standard non-disclosure agreement and release of claims. It states that you agree not to pursue legal action against Luma North Systems, its executives, or its board. It also reaffirms your commitment to confidentiality regarding all internal practices, proprietary technology, and personnel matters. Personnel matters. That was the key. They did not care about the code. They cared about the secrets. I looked at the NDA. It was dense, single-spaced, aggressive. It was a gag order dressed up in legalese. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic digging into my shoulder blades. I thought about the early days. I remembered sitting on the floor of our first rented office with the original founder, a brilliant but chaotic man named David, trying to figure out how to make payroll when we had $12 in the bank. I had leveraged my personal credit cards to keep the servers running. I had rewritten the entire billing logic in a weekend to stop us from bleeding cash. Back then, there was no Logan. There was no board. There was just us, fighting to keep the lights on. Nobody talked about gross negligence when I was saving the company from bankruptcy. Nobody talked about lack of commitment when I was the only one in the building at 4 a.m. Logan did not just want me gone. He wanted to rewrite history. He wanted to erase the fact that I was the safety net he had been walking on for years. He wanted to pretend he was the genius, and I was just a liability he had finally cut loose. I looked at Brittany. She looked miserable. She knew this was wrong, but she also knew she had student loans and rent to pay. She was just a cog in the machine I had helped build. I am not signing this today, I said. Brittany blinked. The script did not have a branch for this. Oh. Well, the offer is valid for 48 hours, but you need to understand, Piper, without the signature, the termination stands as for cause. That means no severance, and we will contest any unemployment claim. I picked up the envelope. I did not open the water bottle. I did not take a tissue. Brittany, I said softly. She looked up. Yes, I tapped the paragraph about the verbal warnings, the fabricated history of negligence. Do you know what perjury is? She stiffened. Excuse me. This document claims Logan gave me verbal warnings. That never happened. If I sign this, I am agreeing to a lie. If I do not sign it, and this goes to court, Logan will have to testify under oath that he had those conversations. I leaned forward. The air in the small room felt suddenly very thin. So I have one question for you, I said, and I want you to think about the answer very carefully before you report back to him. Are you absolutely sure Logan wants to put his signature under all of these words? Brittany opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the file. She realized, in that second, that she was not just processing a firing, she was handling a grenade. I did not wait for an answer. I stood up. "I will have my lawyer review this," I said. I turned and walked out. I did not look back. I walked through the main lobby, past the reception desk where I had interviewed my first hire. I walked past the security turnstiles that I had programmed. The elevator ride down to the garage was 22 seconds long. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. My reflection in the polished steel doors looked pale, but dry-eyed. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest like a stone slab, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of a breakdown on company property. I got into my car, a sensible sedan that was 5 years old because I was always too busy working to shop for a new one. I threw the envelope onto the passenger seat. I did not go to a bar. I did not call my mother. I drove. I navigated the Austin traffic on autopilot, merging onto Mopac Expressway with mechanical precision. The skyline drifted past, glass and steel monuments to money and ego. Luma North was just another light in that cluster, and I had just been unplugged. But as I drove, the shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Logan had made a mistake, a massive, arrogant, fatal mistake. He thought he was firing an employee. He forgot he was firing the architect. He assumed I would take the 3 months of pay and fade away. Because that is what people do. They get scared. They worry about their reputation. They sign the paper to make the pain stop. He forgot about the folder. I merged onto my exit, the tires humming on the asphalt. 3 years ago, when the company was fragile and Logan was desperate, we signed a document. It was a contingency plan, a doomsday clause. It was designed to protect the company from a rogue CEO, or a hostile takeover, or a collapse of leadership. We called it the Key Person Contingency. I had put my copy in a fireproof safe the day we signed it. I had not looked at it since. I had almost forgotten exactly what it said. I just remembered that it required 2 signatures to validate any major executive change regarding the technical leadership. One was the CEO, the other was the trustee of the Hartwell Family Trust. And this morning, outside the elevator, Vivian Pierce, the trustee herself, had looked me in the eye and asked if I was the one who fixed things. I pulled into my driveway. I killed the engine. I sat there for a moment in the silence of my garage, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. I grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat. Then I walked inside, kicked off my heels, and went straight to the hallway closet. I pulled back the coat rack. I pried up the loose floorboard. It was time to see if the ink was still dry. It was time to see if I was just a fired employee, or if I was the person who was about to burn Logan's kingdom to the ground. The metal of the safe was cold against my fingertips. I turned the handle and heard the heavy thud of the locking bolts retracting. It was a sound I had not heard in 3 years. The air inside the small steel box smelled stale, smelling of old dust and stagnant time. I reached inside, bypassing the stack of emergency cash and the velvet pouch containing my grandmother's jewelry. My hand closed around the spine of a black accordion folder. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. The label was handwritten in my own sharp, angular script. Key Person Contingencies, LNS. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my hallway closet, the folder resting on my knees. To understand why this folder existed, you have to understand what Luma North Systems was before the glass walls and the $40 million contracts. You have to go back to the dark winter of 2022. Back then, the company was hemorrhaging cash. Our original founder, David, was in the final stages of pancreatic cancer. He was the soul of the company, a brilliant engineer who wrote code like poetry but viewed balance sheets as a nuisance. When he got sick, the vultures started circling. We had missed payroll twice in October. The servers were being held together with duct tape and prayers. We were 2 weeks away from Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Logan Pierce was the chief operating officer at the time. He was not the polished, TED Talk-giving visionary he pretends to be today. Back then, he was sweaty, desperate, and terrified. He had leveraged his own personal assets to buy into the C-suite, and he was watching his investment evaporate. He had the ambition of Caesar, but the strategic foresight of a hamster. We needed a miracle. That miracle arrived in the form of Arthur Hartwell. Arthur was Vivian's father. He was an old-school Texas oil tycoon who had diversified into tech venture capital not because he understood it, but because he wanted to leave a legacy for his daughter. He agreed to inject $12 million into Luma North to keep the lights on and pivot us toward the enterprise market. But Arthur was not a fool. He knew David was dying. He knew Logan was next in line for the throne. And most importantly, he knew Logan was a salesman who could not code his way out of a paper bag. I remember the meeting like it was yesterday. It was in the library of Arthur's estate, a room that smelled of leather and cigar smoke. David was there, looking frail in a wheelchair. Logan was there, pacing nervously. Arthur sat behind a desk the size of a small car, his lawyer standing beside him like a gargoyle. And I was there. I was the head of systems, the only person who understood the proprietary algorithm that made our product valuable. Arthur looked at Logan and said something I never forgot. He said, "I am giving you the engine of a Ferrari, son, but I know you do not know how to drive a stick shift, so I am going to make sure you cannot fire the mechanic just to save money on gas." That was the birth of the key person clause. Arthur's lawyers drafted a specific addendum to the investment agreement. It identified 3 people as critical infrastructure personnel. I was at the top of that list. The clause was simple but brutal. It stated that because the company's valuation was entirely dependent on the stability of its proprietary technology, the employment of the key persons was protected under the Hartwell Family Trust governance. Specifically, it said that any termination of a key person for cause required not just the signature of the CEO, but the co-signature of the trustee of the Hartwell Family Trust. The logic was sound. Arthur wanted to prevent a new, incompetent CEO Logan from firing the expensive technical talent to boost short-term profits or to cover up his own mistakes. He wanted checks and balances. I remember watching Logan read the contract that day. He flipped through the pages so fast the paper snapped. He was not reading the clauses. He was looking for the zeros. He was looking for his salary package and his equity stake. When he got to the key person section, he barely glanced at it. He looked up at Arthur's lawyer and asked one question. He asked if he was still the CEO on the organizational chart. He asked if he still had the power to sign checks. The lawyer said yes. Logan shrugged, uncapped his Mont Blanc pen, and signed his name with a flourish. He said, "As long as I am the captain of the ship, I do not care about the fine print in the manifest." He did not care. He did not read. He just wanted the money. The money came. The company survived. 6 months later, David passed away. A year after that, Arthur Hartwell had a massive stroke and retired to a care facility, leaving the board. That was when Logan started rewriting reality. He began telling the story of how he single-handedly saved the company. In interviews, he claimed he architected the turnaround. He claimed he found the funding. He erased David. He erased Arthur. And he certainly erased the fact that his power was checked by a trust fund. He surrounded himself with sycophants who did not know the history. He started believing his own lie. But systems people do not forget. We archive. I knew Logan. I knew that one day, his ego would outgrow his gratitude. I knew that eventually, I would become a threat simply because I remembered who he used to be. So I prepared. I made 3 copies of the fully executed agreement with the wet signatures. I gave one to my personal attorney, a shark named Sonia, who specialized in contract law. I scanned one, encrypted it with a 256-bit key, and buried it in a cloud server that only I could access. And I put the 3rd one in this safe. I opened the black folder on my lap now. My fingers traced the document inside. The paper was crisp. I turned to the final page. The signature page. There was Logan's signature, loops and swirls, arrogant and large, and right next to it was the line for the Hartwell Family Trust. 3 years ago, Arthur Hartwell had signed it, but Arthur was dead now. Under the terms of the trust, the authority did not die with him. It passed to the successor. It passed to the new trustee. I looked at the text under the signature line. Authorization required from the acting trustee of the Hartwell Family Trust. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought about the woman I had bumped into this morning, Vivian Pierce. Vivian was not just Logan's wife. She was Arthur Hartwell's only child. Logan treated Vivian like a trophy. He paraded her around at galas, interrupted her at dinners, and treated her family's legacy as his personal piggy bank. He assumed she was just the socialite daughter who signed whatever he put in front of her. He probably thought he controlled the trust through her. But this morning, Vivian was holding a folder. She was looking for the board elevator. She had asked me if I was the one who fixed things. I realized then why she was there. She was not there to support her husband. She was auditing him. I looked at the clause again. Termination for gross negligence shall be void unless co-signed by the trustee. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in 12 hours. Logan had fired me for gross negligence. He had put it in writing. He had announced it to the board. He had made it official, but he had not asked his wife for permission. He had triggered the clause. By firing me without the trust's signature, he had not just violated a contract, he had committed a breach of the investment covenants. He had technically acted outside his authority as CEO. I closed the folder. I did not need a severance package. I did not need 3 months of pay. I held in my hands a piece of paper that proved Logan Pierce had been operating illegally from the moment he told me to pack my things. He thought he had axed me to save a deal. In reality, he had just handed me the axe, and he had laid his own neck on the block. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest. I needed to make a phone call, not to my mother, not to a recruiter. I needed to call the number on the business card that had just slipped out of the folder, the contact for the trust's legal counsel. The game had just changed. I was no longer the victim. I was the glitch in the system that was about to crash the entire server. And the best part was, the only person who could help me execute the command was the woman sharing Logan's bed. I was sitting on my living room floor with the open folder on my lap, my phone in my hand, debating whether to call the number for the trust's legal counsel immediately or wait until morning. It was 11 o'clock at night. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the drive home was beginning to curdle into a shaky exhaustion. I had the smoking gun in my lap, but I still felt like a woman who had just been erased from existence. Then my laptop, sitting open on the coffee table, chimed. It was a soft, generic notification sound, but in the silence of my house, it sounded like a gunshot. I leaned forward. It was not a work email my access had been cut hours ago. It was not a LinkedIn message from a recruiter. It was an email sent to my personal encrypted account, the one I only used for sensitive banking and legal correspondence. The sender was ve.hartwell@privatefamilyoffice.com. I stared at the name, Hartwell. The subject line was short, devoid of corporate buzzwords, and chillingly precise. That elevator bump wasn't an accident. My breath hitched. I clicked open the message. The body text was sparse, written in a font that looked like it had been typed on a phone in a hurry. Piper, do not sign the severance papers. Do not call your lawyer yet. We have a mutual problem named Logan, and I think it is time we discussed a solution. Meet me at the Midnight Cowboy on 6th Street in 45 minutes. Come to the back booth. Come alone. It was signed simply, V. I looked at the folder in my lap, then back at the screen. Vivian Pierce. The woman I had spent 6 years viewing as a decorative accessory, a woman whose biggest contribution to the company seemed to be choosing the floral arrangements for the holiday party, was emailing me from a private server with a message that implied conspiracy. I did not hesitate. I changed out of my suit into jeans and a leather jacket armor for a different kind of battlefield and grabbed the black folder. I locked the house and drove back toward downtown Austin. The Midnight Cowboy is a speakeasy, the kind of place you have to know about to find. It is dark, intimate, and quiet, a world away from the neon chaos of dirty 6th Street outside. I gave the doorman my name, and he nodded, leading me straight to a secluded booth in the far corner, shrouded in shadow. Vivian was already there, If I had expected the poised, perfect socialite from the morning, I would have been disappointed. The Vivian sitting in front of me looked like she had taken off a mask. Her hair, usually lacquered into submission, was loose and falling around her shoulders. She had traded her cream power suit for a simple black silk blouse. On the table in front of her was not a glass of wine, but a tumbler of bourbon. Neat. She looked tired. Not the tired of a woman who missed a spa appointment, but the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been holding her breath for years. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and totally devoid of warmth. "Sit down." "Piper," she said. Her voice was low, cutting through the ambient jazz music. I sat. I placed the black folder on the table between us. Vivian glanced at it, and a corner of her mouth quirked up. "I see you kept your copy," she said. "I told my father you were the smart one. He worried you were too technical to understand the politics. I told him anyone who can architect a fail-safe system knows exactly how humans fail. You knew." I said. It was not a question. "You knew he was going to fire me." Vivian took a sip of her bourbon. She held the liquid in her mouth for a moment before swallowing. "I knew he was planning something. Logan has been erratic lately. He has been obsessed with this Helix Ridge deal. He thinks if he sells the company for 9 figures, it will finally prove to the world that he is a genius, not just a lucky man who married the right woman." She leaned forward, the candlelight flickering in her eyes. "But this morning, when I saw you in the hallway, I realized he had moved his timeline up. He did not just want to sell the company. He wanted to sanitize it. He wanted to remove anyone who remembered the old days, anyone who knew that without my father's money, Luminorth would have been a tax write-off in 2022. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a stack of papers. She slid them across the table. I picked them up. It was a dossier, not on me, but on Logan. It was a collection of emails, board minutes, and private memos. "I have been reading." "Piper," Vivian said softly. "After my father passed, everyone assumed the control of the trust went to a board of gray-haired men in Dallas. Logan certainly assumed that. He thinks I am just the rubber stamp. He thinks I spend my days shopping and planning galas." She laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "He forgot that I grew up watching Arthur Hartwell negotiate oil leases. I know how to read a contract, and more importantly, I know how to spot a liar." She tapped the dossier. "I saw your name in the protocols. I saw the incident reports from the data center fires you put out. I saw the architecture diagrams. And then I saw the board meeting minutes where Logan presented those same successes as his own strategic victories. He has been erasing you for a long time. Piper, he has been systematically minimizing your role so that when he finally cut you loose, the board would not panic." I felt a lump form in my throat. Hearing it confirmed by her was different than suspecting it myself. It validated every paranoid thought I had suppressed for years. Why, I asked, "Why are you telling me this? You are his wife. If he sells the company, you get richer. Why sabotage him?" Vivian looked down at her drink. She swirled the amber liquid, watching the light catch in the glass. Because a man who can rewrite history at work does not stop at the office door, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a scream. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear behind the defiance. "He has started doing it to me, too. Piper. He talks over me at dinners. He makes decisions about our personal assets without consulting me. He tells our friends stories about our marriage that never happened, stories where he is the savior and I am the fragile one. He is positioning himself, just like he positioned you." She reached out and tapped the black folder I had brought. "If he can erase you, the person who actually built the product that makes him a millionaire, then erasing me from this marriage is just a matter of logistics for him. He will take the payout from the Helix Ridge sale. He will file for divorce, and he will claim he built it all himself. He will leave me with nothing but the furniture." She opened her own folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the key person clause, the same one I had in my safe, but there was a difference. Her copy had a fresh stamp on it, A notary seal dated today. I am the trustee. Piper, she said, her voice turning steel hard. When my father died, the authority transferred to me. Sole authority, not a board. Me. She pointed to the paragraph that I had memorized. Termination for gross negligence shall be void unless co-signed by the trustee. I did not sign your termination letter, Vivian said. In fact, I was never even informed of it. That means legally, you are not fired, and it means Logan has just committed fraud. He represented to the board and to the buyers that he had full authority to remove you. He lied. I looked at the document, then at her. The implications were staggering. If this came out before the deal closed, it would kill the sale. It would destroy Logan's credibility. It would trigger a vote of no confidence. So what do we do? I asked. Do I sue? Vivian shook her head. No. If you sue now, he will settle. He will throw money at you to make you go away, and he will spin it as a nuisance lawsuit. He will survive, and he will learn to be more careful next time. She leaned across the table, her eyes locking onto mine. We do not want a settlement, Piper. We want an execution. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The way she said it, cold, precise. Final reminded me of my father's old saying, beware the fury of a patient woman. The signing ceremony for the Helix Ridge acquisition is in 3 days, Vivian said. Thursday afternoon. They are renting the ballroom at the Four Seasons. The press will be there. The entire board will be there. The buyers will be there with their checkbooks open. She smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. Logan thinks he has cleared the deck. He thinks you are gone, crying into your severance check. He thinks I'm going to sit in the back row and clap like a good little wife. She slid the notary-stamped document toward me. I want you to walk into that room. Piper, I want you to wait until the pen is hovering over the paper, and then I want us to remind Logan Pierce that he does not own this company, and he certainly does not own us. I picked up the document. I felt the texture of the paper. It felt like a weapon. You are willing to blow up the deal, I asked. You are willing to lose $125 million just to stop him. Vivian finished her bourbon in one swallow. She slammed the glass down on the table. Honey, she said, her Texas drawl slipping out for the first time. I do not care about the money. I have plenty of money. I want his reputation. I want to watch him realize that the 2 women he underestimated are the ones holding the keys to his kingdom. She stood up, smoothing her silk blouse. She looked down at me. Go home. Piper, get some sleep. Do not sign the severance. Do not answer his calls. Let him think he has won. Let him get comfortable. And on Thursday, wear something sharp. We have a meeting to attend. I watched her walk out of the bar, her head held high, moving with a grace that was no longer decorative. It was predatory. I sat there in the dark for a long time, tracing the signature on the page. I had walked into this bar thinking I was alone in a fight against a giant. I walked out realizing that the giant was standing on a trapdoor, and his wife had just handed me the lever. Wednesday morning found us in a place that smelled of mahogany, lemon polish, and billable hours. We were in the private conference room of Sonia Alvarez, the primary counsel for the Hartwell Family Trust. It was a sterile, soundproofed box high above Congress Avenue, the kind of room where fortunes are divided and companies are dissected. On the table before us lay the autopsy of my career and the blueprint for Logan's destruction. There were stacks of printed emails, the bylaws of Luma North Systems, the preliminary term sheet from Helix Ridge Capital, and sitting in the center like a loaded gun, the original key person contingency agreement. Sonia Alvarez was a woman who looked like she could sharpen a knife on her cheekbones. She was in her 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than my severance package, and she read contracts the way I read code. She scanned the termination notice Brittany had given me, then cross-referenced it with the trust documents. This is sloppy, Sonia said, tossing the paper onto the table. Her voice was dry and devoid of sympathy, which I appreciated. Lawyers who offer sympathy usually charge extra for it. Logan is acting like a man who thinks the rules do not apply to him because they never have. He has fired you for gross negligence. I nodded. That is what the paper says. Sonia tapped a manicured fingernail on the table, but under the key person clause, a termination for cause requires the signature of the trustee. Without that signature, the termination is void ab initio. That means from the beginning, in the eyes of the law. Piper, you are not fired. You are just on a very unauthorized vacation. Vivian was sitting at the head of the table. She looked different today. The vulnerability from the bar was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. She was scrolling through an iPad, reviewing the board minutes I had managed to pull from my cached files before my access was cut. It gets worse for him, Vivian said without looking up. Or better for us. I have been looking at the proxy statements. Logan has been voting with the Hartwell shares for 5 years. He treats them like his own personal war chest, but he forgets that the proxy is revocable. She turned the iPad around to show us a document. It was a voting rights agreement signed by her father. My father gave Logan the right to vote the shares. Vivian explained. But there is a covenant here, Clause 14. The proxy is automatically suspended if the proxy holder engages in acts of moral turpitude or material governance violations. Sonia smiled, a slow, predatory expression. And forging a termination process to defraud a buyer is definitely a material governance violation. I leaned forward, looking at the complex web of documents. I was beginning to see the architecture of the trap. This was not just about getting my job back. This was a system reset. So here's the situation, I said, organizing the facts like data points. Helix Ridge is buying Luma North for $125 million. They are buying it based on a due diligence report that claims the leadership team is stable and the risks are low. Logan has fired me, the person who manages the actual risk, and lied about it. He has hidden the fact that he needs Vivian's permission to fire me, and he is voting with shares he does not actually control. Exactly. Sonia said, if Helix Ridge finds out about any one of those things, they will pause the deal to renegotiate. If they find out about all of them at once, they will walk away, and they will probably sue Logan for fraud. Vivian looked at me. Piper, did you access the data room, the virtual repository where Logan put all the documents for the buyers? I nodded. Before my credentials were killed on Monday, I ran a script to mirror the index of the data room. I wanted to see what he was showing them. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and booted it up. I opened the mirrored index. I searched for key person and Hartwell Trust. The search bar blinked. 0 results. He scrubbed it, I said, turning the screen so they could see. He deleted the key person agreement from the disclosure list. He did not just ignore it, he actively hid it. Sonia let out a low whistle. That is intentional misrepresentation. That is the kill shot. If we show this to the Helix Ridge lawyers, the deal is dead instantly. So what is the play, I asked. Do we file an injunction? Do we send this to the board right now? No, Vivian said sharply. Her voice cut through the room. If we send this to the board now, they will circle the wagons. The board wants this money just as much as Logan does. They will try to fix it quietly. They will offer you a settlement. Piper. They will offer me a new car. They will delay the signing by a week, cook up some new paperwork, and push the deal through. Logan survives. He gets slapped on the wrist, but he gets his $125 million. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Austin skyline. I do not want him to survive, she said quietly. I want him to fall, and I want him to fall in public. Sonia nodded, understanding the strategy immediately. We need maximum leverage. Leverage is a function of timing. The closer we are to the signature, the more leverage we have. She turned to me. The signing ceremony is tomorrow at 2 p.m. The Four Seasons Ballroom. All the heavy hitters will be there. The Helix Ridge partners, the banks, the press. The plan is simple, Vivian said, turning back to us. We let him walk into that room. We let him shake hands. We let him give his speech about integrity and vision. We wait until the contracts are on the table. We wait until the pen is literally in his hand, and then I asked, and then we walk in. Sonia said, Vivian enters as the trustee. You enter as the wrongfully terminated executive, and I enter as the lawyer holding the grenade. We present the key person clause to the buyers, not the board. Sonia continued. We tell Helix Ridge that the termination of the head of system strategy is invalid. We tell them that the CEO does not have the authority to sign the sale because his voting rights are suspended due to fraud. Vivian's eyes were hard. We force Helix Ridge to make a choice right there in front of the cameras. Do they sign a deal with a CEO who is under active investigation for fraud? Or do they listen to the majority shareholder? I sat back, my mind racing through the scenarios. It was a high-risk gamble. If we walked in too late, the ink would be dry, and undoing the deal would take years of litigation. If we walked in too early, security would toss us out before we could speak. What do we want? I asked. When the dust settles. What is the win condition? Vivian sat down again. For me, the condition is total removal. Logan is out as CEO. He is removed from the board, and because he is being terminated for cause governance violation, he loses his golden parachute. He walks away with nothing but his ego. And for you, Sonia added, looking at me, you have two options. Option A is reinstatement. You go back to Luma North, but this time you report directly to the board, not the CEO. You get a raise, a title bump, and rock-solid job security. Option B is a payout. We demand a settlement equal to your equity vesting plus damages, probably somewhere in the range of $3 to $4 million. I thought about it. I thought about the servers I had built. I thought about the team I had hired. I thought about the 6 years of my life I had poured into that company. I want option A, I said, but with a caveat. I want to be the chief risk officer. And I want a seat on the board. If I am going to save this company from Logan, I want the authority to make sure it never happens again. Vivian smiled. Done. Sonia leaned in, her expression serious. Listen to me carefully. This has to be executed with surgical precision. We are going to be accusing a CEO of fraud in a room full of people whose bonuses depend on him being innocent. They will try to silence us. They will try to discredit us. You need to have your evidence ready. Sonia told me. You need the logs. You need the proof that the data center outage was fake. You need the proof that you were blocked from the meeting. Because the moment we accuse him, he is going to pivot. He is going to say you are a disgruntled employee and Vivian is a crazy ex-wife. He is a master manipulator. Piper, do not underestimate his ability to lie when he is cornered. I tapped my laptop. I have the logs. I said, I have the IP addresses. I have the timestamps. I have everything. Good, Vivian said. She checked her watch. 26 hours to go. I suggest you go buy a new suit. Piper, black, something that says funeral, because tomorrow, she added, picking up her purse, we are going to bury a reputation. I looked at the two women, the socialite, the lawyer, and the engineer. We were an unlikely team, but as I packed up my laptop, I realized that Logan had made the classic mistake of the arrogant man. He assumed that because we were quiet, we were powerless. He assumed that because he was the face of the company, he was the heart of it. He was about to learn that you can survive heart failure, but you cannot survive total system shutdown. I left the office and walked out into the blinding Texas sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from a blocked number. Just sign the papers. Piper, don't make this ugly. It was Logan. He was sweating. He knew I had not signed yet. He could feel the loose end dangling, and it was making him nervous. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Silence was louder. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I would not make it ugly. I would make it professional. I would make it public. And I would make it the most expensive meeting he ever attended. Thursday morning arrived with the silence of a funeral. But by 10 o'clock, my digital life was being dismantled brick by brick. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a cold cup of coffee, when my phone started vibrating with a different kind of intensity. It was not the frantic buzzing of a crisis. It was the sporadic, hesitant pinging of pity. Logan had sent the email. I did not have access to the company server anymore, but in the corporate world, leaks are inevitable. A junior engineer, someone I had hired fresh out of college, forwarded me a screenshot via an encrypted messaging app. The subject line was simply, "Organizational Update." The email read that effective immediately. Piper Phillips is no longer with Luma North Systems. While we appreciate her contributions during our startup phase, the company is moving in a new strategic direction that requires a different level of executive commitment and alignment with our future vision. We wish her the best in her future endeavors. It was a masterclass in corporate assassination. He did not say I was fired. He implied I had failed to evolve. He painted me as a relic of the startup phase, a chaotic element that did not fit the sleek, mature company he was selling to Helix Ridge. Then came the public humiliation. I opened LinkedIn to see a notification tag from the official Luma North page. They had posted a farewell message, but instead of using my professional headshot, the one I had paid $500 for last year, they used a grainy, candid photo from a company picnic 5 years ago where I looked disheveled, holding a plastic cup. The caption was brief. "Thank you to Piper Phillips for her service in our early years." Luma North continues to restructure for excellence as we approach our next milestone. It was subtle, but to anyone in the industry, the message was screaming. It said she is old news. It said she is not executive material. It said we outgrew her. My inbox began to fill with private messages from managers and engineers I had worked with for years. They were all variations of the same cowardly theme. One wrote that he was so sorry to hear the news, but could not comment publicly because things were tense. Another wrote that she knew the gross negligence claim was nonsense, but she had a mortgage to pay and could not risk crossing Logan right before the acquisition bonuses were paid out. They were good people, but fear makes cowards of us all. Logan had successfully terrified them into silence. He had created a narrative where I was the cautionary tale. Look what happens when you cross the visionary. You disappear. At 11:30 in the morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it, expecting a recruiter, or maybe a journalist. It was a man named Sterling, a lawyer I had never met, claiming to represent Logan Pierce personally. "Ms. Phillips," Sterling said. His voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey poured over ice. "I am calling to facilitate a resolution. Mr. Pierce is a generous man. He wants to ensure your transition is smooth." I said nothing. I just pressed the record button on my secondary phone. "We are prepared to expedite your severance payment." Sterling continued. 3 months of full salary, plus, Mr. Pierce is willing to offer a personal letter of recommendation, provided the separation agreement is signed by 5 o'clock today, and if I do not sign, I asked. There was a pause, a heavy, calculated silence. "If you do not sign, Ms. Phillips, then Luma North will be forced to contest your unemployment claim. Furthermore, Mr. Pierce feels a moral obligation to be transparent with any future employers who might call for a reference. The industry is small. It would be unfortunate if the details of your gross negligence became public knowledge. Nobody wants to hire a liability." The threat hung in the air. "Sign the paper and take the hush money, or we will make sure you never work in this town again. We will brand you as incompetent. We will starve you out." I hung up. My hand was shaking. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The panic started to set in. I checked my bank account balance on my phone. I had enough savings to last 4 months if I was careful, maybe 5 if I sold my car. But after that, if Logan really blacklisted me, if he really spread the lie that I was negligent, I would be unhireable. I was 40 years old. In the tech world, that is already considered ancient. With a black mark on my record, I was dead. I sank onto the floor of my living room. This is the part of the movie where the audience expects the protagonist to break. This is the moment where the pressure becomes too much, where the logical choice is to take the check, sign the NDA, and move to a cheaper city to start over. I felt the weight of it crushing me. The injustice was physically painful. I had built the systems that made Logan rich, and he was using his wealth to suffocate me. I closed my eyes. I was ready to give up. I was ready to call Sterling back and ask for the pen. Then my laptop dinged. It was the encrypted email client again. Another message from V. The subject line was empty. The body of the email contained no text, just 3 audio attachments. I clicked the first file. It was a recording, clear and crisp, likely taken from a phone sitting on a table. I heard the clinking of silverware, background noise of a restaurant, and then I heard Logan's voice. He sounded relaxed, maybe a little drunk. "The numbers are solid," Logan was saying. "But the churn rate on the Tanaka account is going to be a red flag during due diligence. We lost 3 points of margin there last quarter." Another voice, deeper, presumably a banker or an advisor, replied, "Helix Ridge is going to ask about that. If they think it is a structural issue with the product, they will discount the valuation." No, Logan interrupted, laughing. "It is not the product. We just need a narrative. We need a fall guy. Someone we can point to and say, 'There was the problem, and we fixed it.'" The second file was shorter. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Logan's voice again. "I am going to pin the Tanaka meeting on Piper. She is legacy staff anyway. Too expensive. We frame it as a leadership failure. She missed the meeting. Client got mad. We fired her to show we have high standards. It cleans up the churn number and cuts OPEX at the same time. 2 birds. I felt the blood rushing to my ears. My hands were cold, but my chest was burning. I clicked the third file. This one sounded like it was recorded in a car. "She is a systems person," Logan was saying, his voice sneering. "She does not read contracts. She just reads code. She will take the severance and fade away. They always do. As long as she is gone before the signing, Helix Ridge will never know we cooked the narrative on the client retention." I sat there, staring at the screen. The fear that had been paralyzing me 5 minutes ago evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard rage. This was not just wrongful termination. This was not just a bad boss being mean. This was securities fraud. Logan was not just firing me. He was manufacturing a lie to explain away financial losses to a buyer. He was using my reputation as a shield to cover up business failures. He was defrauding Helix Ridge Capital of millions of dollars by misrepresenting the health of the company and the reasons for personnel changes. I realized then that I was not a victim. I was not a helpless employee begging for a reference. I was a witness to a crime. Logan thought he was erasing a liability. Instead, he had just handed the murder weapon to the only person who knew how to use it. He thought the story was about my incompetence. He did not realize the story was actually about his fraud. I stood up. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not scared anymore. She was ready. I walked back to my phone. I saw the text message from the lawyer. "Sterling, Ms. Phillips, I need an answer regarding the offer." I typed a reply. "My answer is no. I will see you at the signing." I hit send. Then I grabbed the black folder and the USB drive where I had just saved the audio files. Vivian was right. I needed a black suit, and I needed to make sure it was pressed sharp enough to draw blood. Because tomorrow, I was not going into a meeting. I was going into a war. The stage was set at the Westin near the airport, inside the Diamond Conference Suite. It was the kind of room designed to make people feel wealthy but uncomfortable, filled with the smell of lemon furniture polish, cold filtered air, and the quiet hum of tension. I was not in the room yet. I was standing in the service corridor just outside the double mahogany doors, checking my watch, visualizing every movement happening inside as if I were directing a movie. Inside that room, Logan Pierce was playing the role of his life. He walked in like a returning war hero. He was wearing a brand new Navy suit, tailored specifically for this day, a suit that likely cost more than the severance package he tried to bribe me with. He moved with that practiced, predatory grace of a man who believes he has already won. He shook hands with the partners from Helix Ridge Capital, flashing that wide, white smile that had charmed investors for years. I could imagine his voice, booming and confident, bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. He was telling them the story of the new Luma North. He was telling them about resilience. He was likely saying things like, "We have trimmed the fat, and we have optimized our leadership structure to align with a more aggressive future." To him, I was the fat. I was the inefficiency he had heroically cut away to save the deal. On the long oval table, 20 leather-bound agenda packets were laid out. I knew exactly what was in them because I had seen the digital drafts before my access was revoked. My name was nowhere to be found. The position of head of systems strategy had been deleted from the organizational chart, replaced by a vague box labeled Technical Operations Lead, to be hired post-closing. The Hartwell Family Trust, the entity that actually controlled the company, was reduced to a single dry footnote on page 42, listed merely as a non-voting passive shareholder. It was a complete fabrication of reality, printed on heavy bond paper. Sitting in the back row, away from the main table, was Vivian. She was playing her part perfectly, to the men in that room. She was just the trophy wife, the decorative accessory there to support her husband's big day. She sat with her ankles crossed, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of polite, vacant interest. She was wearing a soft pastel dress, something non-threatening, something that said she had no interest in business. Next to her sat Sonia Alvarez. Logan had introduced her simply as an advisor to the family office, a vague title that suggested she helped manage Vivian's charity galas or shopping budget. Logan did not look at her. He certainly did not look at the iPad Sonia had resting on her knees, or the finger hovering over the send button on her screen. At the head of the table sat Marissa Kane, the lead partner from Helix Ridge. She was sharp, focused, and completely unaware that she was buying a lie. She opened the meeting by summarizing their risk assessment. "We have reviewed the operational stability reports," Marissa said, her voice crisp and professional. "The technical due diligence is satisfactory. We noted the recent restructuring of the technical leadership team, while the departure of the former strategy head was sudden. We accept Mr. Pierce's explanation that this was a necessary culture fit adjustment." Logan nodded solemnly. It was a difficult decision. He lied, his face the picture of executive burden. But we cannot let legacy thinking hold back the velocity of our innovation. We needed a clean slate. He was using my career as a stepping stone. He was validating his own fraud by painting me as obsolete. The meeting moved to the closing formalities. The room grew quieter. The air got heavier. This was the moment where $125 million changed hands. The Helix Ridge legal assistant, a young man in a gray suit, began reading down the final pre-closing checklist. His voice was a steady drone in the silence. "Board approval resolution. Confirmed," Logan's lawyer said. "Financial solvency certificate. Confirmed. Regulatory compliance filings. Confirmed. Key person risk assessment and waivers." Logan did not even blink. "Confirmed," he said. "The technical leadership changes have been fully documented and are in compliance with all corporate governance bylaws." It was a direct lie. It was a lie spoken into a room full of witnesses. "Excellent," Marissa said. She signaled to her team. The leather folios containing the final purchase agreement were slid across the polished table. They made a heavy sliding sound, like a guillotine blade coming down. Logan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his lucky Mont Blanc pen. He uncapped it. He looked up at the photographer who had been hired to capture the historic moment. He smiled, tilting his head slightly to the left, his good side. He wanted the photo to be perfect for the press release. He lowered the pen toward the signature line. The tip of the ink was an inch away from the paper, in the back of the room. Sonia Alvarez tapped her iPad screen once. It was a silent action, but its impact was instantaneous. On the table in front of Marissa Kane, a phone buzzed. It was not a text message vibration. It was the specific, urgent ping of a priority legal alert. Marissa did not look at it immediately. She was focused on Logan's hand, but then the phone pinged again, and again. She frowned. She glanced down at the screen. The subject line was screaming in capital letters. "Urgent. Key person clause disclosure. Hartwell. Trust." Marissa froze. Her hand shot out and covered the signature page in front of Logan. "Stop," she said. The word was not loud, but it hit the room like a physical slap. Logan's pen hovered in the air. He looked up, his smile faltering slightly. "Excuse me," Logan asked, trying to keep his tone light. Marissa did not look at him. She grabbed her phone and unlocked it. She read the email. Her eyes widened. She scrolled down, reading the attachment. Her face went from polite interest to cold fury in the span of 3 seconds. She looked up at Logan. Then she looked past him, scanning the back of the room. Her eyes landed on Sonia, who was sitting calmly next to Vivian. "We need a break," Marissa announced, her voice turning to ice. "A technical break. 5 minutes. Everyone clear the room except for the principals." Logan laughed nervously. "Marissa, surely whatever this is can wait until the ink is dry. We are on a tight schedule for the press release." Marissa stood up. She was not smiling. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "My legal team just received a document claiming that your authority to sign this deal is currently suspended due to a breach of your corporate charter." The room erupted into whispers. The board members looked at each other, confused. The bankers stopped checking their watches. Logan stood up, his face flushing red. "That is ridiculous. Who sent you that?" Marissa held up her phone. "It was sent by the legal counsel for the Hartwell Family Trust," she said. Logan spun around. He looked at the back of the room. He looked at his wife. Vivian did not look away. She did not smile. She simply stood up, smoothed her dress, and picked up her purse. Sonia stood up beside her. Logan looked at them, and for the first time, the arrogance cracked. He realized that the furniture was moving. He realized that the silence from the back of the room had not been submission. It had been an ambush. Marissa looked at the confusion, then looked at the door. "We are not signing anything," she declared. "We are going to verify this document." The door to the service corridor where I was standing clicked open. The sound of the latch was loud in the sudden silence of the conference room. It was time. Logan thought he had cleared the board. He thought he had removed the pieces that did not fit, but as the door swung open and the cold air from the hallway hit the room, he was about to realize that he had forgotten to account for the Queen, and the Queen had brought the executioner with her. The 5-minute recess stretched into 10. When the doors finally reopened, the atmosphere in the Diamond Conference Suite had shifted from a celebratory launch to a crime scene investigation. The champagne buckets in the corner suddenly looked garish and inappropriate. Marissa Kane walked back to the head of the table. She was no longer the eager buyer looking to close a deal before the quarter ended. She looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water, and she was trying to figure out if she was the predator or the prey. She did not sit down. She stood behind her leather chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "We have reviewed the documents sent to our legal team," Marissa said. Her voice was flat, stripped of all corporate pleasantries. "It raises significant questions regarding the validity of the representations made in this room today. Before we proceed any further, I require a statement from the authorized representative of the Hartwell Family Trust." Logan chuckled. It was a nervous, hollow sound that bounced off the glass walls. He adjusted his cufflinks, trying to regain the center of gravity. "Marissa, please," Logan said, waving his hand dismissively. "The trust is a passive vehicle. Their legal counsel is a 90-year-old man in Dallas who probably thinks email is witchcraft. I can get him on the phone next week to clarify whatever administrative confusion you are. The trustee is here," a voice said. It was not a loud voice. It was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly steady. Logan stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at the back of the room where the support staff usually sat. Vivian stood up. She did not stand up like a wife waiting for a gala to end. She stood up like a judge entering a courtroom. She smoothed the front of her pastel dress, picked up her clutch, and walked toward the main table. The click of her heels on the parquet floor was the only sound in the room. Vivian, Logan asked, his smile faltering into a grimace of confusion. "Honey, what are you doing? This is a business discussion." Vivian ignored him completely. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture and stood directly across from Marissa Kane. "I am the sole trustee of the Hartwell Family Trust," Vivian said. Her eyes were locked on Marissa. "And I am the majority shareholder of Luma North Systems." The silence that followed was absolute. Logan looked like someone had just slapped him with a wet fish. The board members were exchanging panicked glances. Marissa nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. She looked at the tablet Sonia had passed to her. "Mrs. Pierce," Marissa said, "we have received a copy of a key person contingency clause dated 3 years ago. It lists Piper Phillips as a protected executive. It states that any termination for gross negligence is void unless co-signed by the trustee. Is this document authentic?" "It is," Vivian said. "And did you sign the termination order for Ms. Phillips?" Marissa asked. "I did not," Vivian replied. "In fact, I was not even informed that the termination had taken place until after the fact." Marissa turned her gaze to Logan. It was a look of pure disgust. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "you explicitly stated in your due diligence disclosure that all executive terminations were fully compliant with corporate governance. If the trustee did not sign this, then you have not only violated your company charter, but you have also provided false information to Helix Ridge Capital. That is material misrepresentation." Logan's face went from pale to a flushed, angry red. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is a technicality," he shouted. He looked around the room, seeking allies, but finding none. Piper Phillips was a liability. She was negligent. She missed a client meeting that jeopardized a $40 million contract. He turned to Vivian, his eyes pleading and threatening at the same time. "Vivian, you do not understand the operations," he said, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "Piper nearly destroyed the Tanaka deal. I had to act. It was an emergency. I have explained this to you. She caused terrible damage to the company." Marissa opened her mouth to ask for proof, but Vivian held up a hand. "He claims he had to fire her to save the company," Vivian said to the room. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She placed it in the center of the mahogany table, right next to the unsigned contracts. "But I think the board deserves to hear how he described that emergency to his bankers 2 weeks ago." She pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. It filled the room, bouncing off the expensive wood paneling. "We just need a narrative," Logan's voice said from the recording. "We need a fall guy, someone we can point to and say, 'There was the problem, and we fixed it.'" Logan froze. His mouth hung open. The recording continued. "I am going to pin the Tanaka meeting on Piper. She is legacy staff anyway. Too expensive. We frame it as a leadership failure. She missed the meeting. Client got mad. We fired her to show we have high standards." Vivian let the recording play to the end, where Logan laughed about cooking the narrative. Then she pressed stop. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the projector fan. One of the board members, a man named Henderson, who had always supported Logan, shot up from his chair. "Logan, what is this?" Henderson demanded. "Why have we never seen this key person clause? Why are we hearing recordings of you conspiring to fabricate cause for termination?" Logan began to stammer. He wiped sweat from his upper lip. That was just brainstorming. It was hypothetical. And that clause, I thought it was just a side letter. It was from the startup days. I did not think it was binding." Sonia Alvarez stepped forward from the back of the room. She placed a briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "Mr. Pierce," Sonia said, her voice sharp as a razor, "that clause is part of the founding investment covenants. It is more binding than your position as CEO. And the fraud you just committed by concealing it, that is binding enough to send you to federal prison." Marissa Kane closed the leather folder in front of her. She pushed the contracts away. "This deal is paused," she announced. "Helix Ridge cannot proceed with an acquisition while the target company is in the middle of a governance crisis." She looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Pierce, under the terms of this clause, I see that the trustee has the right to intervene in executive management if there is a breach of protocol. Do you intend to exercise that right?" Vivian turned to look at Logan. For the first time all day, she looked him directly in the eyes. There was no love left in her gaze. There was no anger. There was just the cold, hard resolve of a woman who was done being a prop. "Yes," Vivian said. She looked at the board members, then back to Logan. "As the trustee holding the majority voting block, I am formally proposing a motion to suspend Logan Pierce from all executive duties, effective immediately." Logan gasped. "You cannot do that. I am the CEO. I built this. You built a house of cards. Logan, Vivian said softly, and I am pulling the bottom one out. She turned back to Marissa. We will be conducting an internal investigation into the fraud regarding the Tanaka account and the wrongful termination of key personnel. Until that is resolved, Logan Pierce does not speak for Luma North. Logan looked around the room, frantic. He looked at Henderson. He looked at the bankers, but nobody looked back. They were all looking at Vivian. They were looking at the money, and they realized that the power had shifted. Marissa nodded. Very well. We will wait for the board to formalize the suspension. The air in the room was electric. Logan stood there, alone at the head of the table, his pen still uncapped, his signature line empty. He looked small. He looked like a man who had woken up thinking he was a king, only to find out he was just the jester. And that was when the door to the service corridor opened wide. The heavy door swung open, slicing through the tension in the room like a blade. I stepped inside. I was not wearing the gray hoodie I usually wore to code in. I was wearing a sharp, tailored black blazer, the kind Vivian had suggested. In my hand, I held a red folder. It was distinct from the black one Vivian held. This was the blood file. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Every head turned. The board members looked confused. Marissa Kane looked intrigued. But Logan looked at me like I was a corpse that had crawled out of the grave to drag him back down with me. His face lost the last traces of its color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. I walked past the empty chairs and stood next to Vivian. I looked at Marissa Kane. "Ms. Kane, my name is Piper Phillips. I am the architect of the risk and compliance systems for this company. I am also the person Logan Pierce claims he fired for negligence." Logan found his voice then. It was a strangled, desperate sound. "Security," he barked, looking at the door. "Get her out of here. She is a disgruntled former employee trespassing on private property. Sit down." "Logan," Vivian said. She did not raise her voice, but the command was absolute. "The trustee has invited her. She stays." Logan sank back into his chair, his hands gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. I placed the red folder on the table in front of Marissa. "You have heard the audio of the intent," I said. "Now I am giving you the digital footprint of the execution." I opened the folder. The first page was a server log, highlighted in yellow. On Tuesday morning, I received an alert that our Dallas data center was experiencing a catastrophic failure. I explained. That alert was the reason I missed the meeting. It was the reason I was not in that chair when you arrived. I pointed to the timestamp, but as you can see from these system logs, there was no failure. The alert was manually triggered. Someone went into the admin console and lowered the heat threshold to 0 to force a panic notification. Marissa picked up the paper. She scanned the lines of code. "And who triggered it?" she asked. I turned the page. "The command came from a root account," I said, "admin01. But the IP address associated with the command did not come from the server room. It came from the executive suite. Specifically, it came from the workstation assigned to Logan Pierce's executive assistant." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. I laid out the next piece of evidence. It was a printout of the Slack messages that had been deleted from the server but preserved in my local cache. "Here is the instruction from his assistant telling me to skip your meeting to fix the fire." I said, "And here is the timestamp of when Logan ordered my access card to be deactivated, so I could not get back into the room even if I tried." I looked directly at the partners from Helix Ridge. "He created a crisis. He sent me to fix it, and then he fired me for not being here. He staged the entire event to create a scapegoat for his churn numbers." I paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle on them. Then I delivered the final blow. "I asked you to ask yourselves one question," I said, leaning my hands on the table. "If your future CEO is willing to stage a technical crisis and frame the person who built his safety systems just to close a deal, what do you think he has done with the financial reports you are holding in your hands?" Marissa Kane dropped the paper. She looked at Logan with a mixture of horror and realization. The trust was gone. It had evaporated instantly. In the world of high finance, you can survive a bad quarter. You cannot survive a lie. Marissa turned to the board of directors. Her face was hard as stone. Helix Ridge is withdrawing our offer under the current terms, she announced. We cannot proceed with a partner who manufactures internal sabotage to manipulate valuation. This is fraud, and we will be obligated to report this discovery to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The board members began to panic. They were watching their payday disappear. Unless, Marissa continued, her voice cutting through the murmurs, unless there is an immediate and total restructuring of the governance of this company. She looked at Vivian. Mrs. Pierce, she said, if you are willing to exercise your authority as trustee, we might be able to salvage a deal, but Logan Pierce cannot be part of it. There is no gray area here. He goes, or we walk. Vivian stood up again. She looked at the board members, row by row. I am formally revoking the proxy voting rights previously granted to Logan Pierce, she declared. The Hartwell Family Trust is assuming direct voting control. She turned to the corporate secretary, who was typing furiously in the corner. Please record that I am casting the majority vote to remove Logan Pierce as CEO for cause, specifically for gross misconduct and material breach of fiduciary duty. I second the motion, Henderson said quickly. Trying to save his own skin, the vote was unanimous. It took less than 30 seconds to dismantle a reign that had lasted 5 years. And because the termination is for cause, Vivian added, her voice cold, the golden parachute clause in his contract is void. He leaves with nothing. Logan sat there, slumped in his chair. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His suit looked too big for him. The arrogant vision of the future was gone, replaced by a terrified man facing a federal investigation. Marissa turned to me. Ms. Phillips, she said, Helix Ridge believes that the stability of this asset depends on the people who actually understand it. We are proposing a new organizational framework. We would like you to return to Luma North. I looked at her. Not as head of system strategy. I said, that title is too small for the mess I have to clean up. Marissa nodded, understanding the negotiation. Agreed, she said. We propose the role of Chief Systems and Risk Officer. You will report directly to the board and the trust, not the CEO. You will have full autonomy to audit the books and stabilize the infrastructure before we resume the acquisition talks. I looked at Vivian. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I accept, I said. The meeting adjourned. It was chaotic. Lawyers were shouting into phones. Board members were scrambling to distance themselves from Logan. Security guards appeared at the door, waiting for instructions. I packed up my red folder. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was not joy. It was the satisfaction of a system returning to equilibrium. The error had been corrected. As I turned to leave, I felt a hand on my arm. I looked down. It was Logan. He was still sitting in his chair, but he was reaching out to me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked desperate. Piper, he whispered, please, we can talk about this. I can explain. I was under so much pressure. You know how it is. He tightened his grip on my sleeve. You cannot leave me like this, he pleaded. They are going to ruin me. I need a witness. I need you to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Piper, please. We were a team. I looked at his hand on my blazer. Then I looked at his face. I remembered the empty chair on the slide. I remembered the humiliation in the glass room. I remembered the 3 years of him taking credit for my work. I gently but firmly removed his hand from my arm. I stepped back. The room was emptying out. Vivian was waiting for me by the door. Logan, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. You told the board that I had outlived my usefulness. Do you remember that? He flinched. Well, I said, leaning in slightly. The good news is that the key person clause did not. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the door where Vivian and Sonia were waiting. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was behind me. An empty chair. And this time, the right person was sitting in it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you have ever had a boss try to erase your hard work, let me know in the comments below. And please tell me where you are tuning in from, because I love reading about where our community is listening. Make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and press the hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to know they are not alone.